For years, people assumed there had to be friction between Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood. Both became Western icons, shared the screen in legendary films, and one eventually grew into a much bigger star. But just 6 years before his death, Van Cleef finally admitted what he genuinely thought about Eastwood, and his view surprised nearly everyone. His remarks revealed the truth about their relationship, their careers, and one of Hollywood's most misunderstood partnerships. Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr. was born on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey, to Marion and Clarence Sr. He grew up in a home with deep Dutch roots. Long before audiences knew him as the cold villain in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he was a Jersey kid who made a bold choice. He quit high school, joined the Navy, and headed straight into World War II. He did not just serve. He and his crew became decorated war heroes. To understand the seriousness of that, picture the conditions they faced. German U-boats were the nightmare of the Atlantic. The Nazi fleet built nearly 1,200 of them, sending them to prowl along the eastern coasts of the United States and Canada, where they picked off merchant ships like predators. In 1942 alone, just 16 U-boats sank nearly 80 ships off the American coast, killing over 1,000 merchant marines. The situation got so bad that Allied forces had to rethink their entire strategy in real time. They adapted fast. They launched aggressive bombing raids, sometimes wiping out multiple submarines in a single day, and organized merchant ships into heavily guarded convoys, making it much harder for U-boats to strike. That shift forced the Germans to change tactics too. Instead of attacking protected fleets, they started hunting isolated vessels. Any ship moving alone became an easy target, turning the ocean into a deadly game of cat and mouse, and Lee Van Cleef was right in the middle of it. He enlisted in the Navy in 1942 at just 17. His first assignment placed him on a submarine hunter, a ship built to track and destroy anything lurking beneath the surface, carrying a 40mm gun and twin 20mm cannons. For about 10 months, he lived that life, chasing shadows in the water. Then he transferred to the USS Incredible, and things escalated. During the Allied landings in southern France, Van Cleef and his crew faced near certain danger. Stationed just off the coast of German-occupied territory, the Incredible came under direct attack. This was no longer training, it was survival. On September 10, 1944, while clearing mines for Allied troops, the ship encountered one of the strangest and most dangerous German weapons: human torpedoes. These were small manned underwater craft designed to sneak up on ships, attach explosives, and escape before detection. Van Cleef and his crew spotted the threat and reacted instantly. What followed was pure chaos, a life-or-death scramble to stop the incoming attackers. Out of 12 human torpedoes sent their way, they destroyed 10, but 2 slipped through. Those 2 made contact, latched on, and detonated. The explosion hit hard, but the Incredible refused to sink. It absorbed the damage held together, and after quick repairs, went back into action for the rest of the war, living up to its name. Van Cleef's actions did not go unnoticed. He was awarded the Bronze Star for bravery under fire, a recognition earned long before he ever stepped in front of a camera. After the Navy, Van Cleef returned to civilian life and took whatever work he could find. He landed a job on Doris Duke's massive estate, but like many veterans, he had to hustle. Days were spent grinding at a factory, nights working as a public accountant, just trying to stay afloat. Then, in 1947, a friend from a small amateur theater group suggested he try acting. It was not a grand plan, just a nudge in a new direction. Van Cleef joined the troupe, and soon it was clear he had something special. By 1950, that experiment turned into a real opportunity when director Joshua Logan brought him on for the national tour of Mr. Roberts. A couple of years later, everything changed again. In 1952, he landed a role in High Noon, a film that would become one of the most iconic westerns ever, sharing the screen with Sheb Wooley, Bob Wilkie, and Ian MacDonald. Van Cleef played Jack Colby, one of 4 outlaws waiting for the final showdown. The story follows Marshall Wilkane, played by Gary Cooper, facing a brutal decision: run and save his life or stay and confront a gang of killers. The tension builds in real time, ticking down to noon. The film stirred controversy for its political themes, but over the years earned its place as a classic. Van Cleef had few lines, but he did not need them. Sitting calm and watchful, smoking and playing the harmonica, he created an impossible-to-ignore presence. His stillness and his eyes told you everything without a word. That quiet intensity became his signature, and even in a small role, he showed he had the makings of a Western legend. By the late 1950s, things got even worse. A serious car accident in 1958 nearly killed him and left a permanent knee injury that caused constant pain. On top of that, rumors about his personal struggles began to spread. Roles dried up, money was thin, and the future looked bleak. At that point, Van Cleef was done with Hollywood. Then came a moment that feels almost too perfect to be real. One day, he got a call from a man asking to meet at a hotel. Van Cleef assumed it was for a decorating job, so he showed up prepared, measuring tape in hand, ready to talk paint and furniture. But the man he met was not a client. It was Sergio Leone. Leone had been watching Van Cleef's old performances overseas and saw something no one in Hollywood seemed to value anymore. He did not see just another background villain. He saw presence, intensity, and a face that could tell a story on its own. And for once, he did not want Van Cleef to play another disposable bad guy. In April 1965, Van Cleef signed a contract that paid him more than he had ever earned before. He was cast as Colonel Mortimer in, for a few dollars more, a co-starring role that would redefine his career. This came after the unexpected success of A Fistful of Dollars, Leone's gritty, low-budget Western shot in Spain with European funding and a then-unknown Clint Eastwood. It flipped the traditional Western on its head. Where American Westerns had become predictable, Leone's version was raw, violent, stylish, and unapologetically cool. For the sequel, Leone needed someone who could match that energy, someone who did not need long speeches to command attention. He needed a face that could carry weight in silence. And Lee Van Cleef, after years in the shadows, was finally about to step into the spotlight. Believe it or not, before Lee signed on, he had not set foot on a film set since 1962. His career had gone cold. So when the opportunity came, it felt like a restart. And the way it came was straight out of a movie. Instead of a contract and a promise, they showed up with a briefcase holding $10,000 in cash. No delays, no paperwork games, just money right in his hands. Lee drove straight to his agent's office, peeled off the 10% cut, then headed home. His wife, Joan, had no clue any of this was happening. Lee walked in, calm as ever, said nothing, and tossed a thick envelope of cash toward her. Midair, the rubber band snapped, and money spilled everywhere, bills floating down, covering the floor like a dream. Joan stood there stunned. She started laughing, then crying, then laughing again. She had to count the money 4 separate times just to convince herself it was real. Just like that, everything shifted. 2 days later, Lee was on a plane to Italy. Cameras were rolling almost immediately. In for a few dollars more, Clint Eastwood returns as a bounty killer forced into an uneasy partnership. The target is a dangerous outlaw named El Indio, and the man he teams up with is just as deadly, a rival hunter named Colonel Mortimer, played by Van Cleef. Mortimer is not loud or flashy. He is controlled, precise, and carries himself like a man who has seen too much. An aging soldier with a sharp mind and a saddlebag full of weapons, he operates with a quiet authority that makes people uneasy before he even speaks. His introduction says it all. He sits on a train, face hidden behind a Bible, dressed entirely in black. Someone mistakes him for a preacher. Then he lowers the book, and those cold, piercing eyes tell a different story. He is not there to save souls. He is heading to Tucumcari to collect bodies and the money attached to them. Van Cleef plays him like a gentleman with a dark edge. Every move is calculated. Every shot feels inevitable. But underneath that calm exterior, something deeper drives him. El Indio is not just another target. He is the man who assaulted and murdered Mortimer's sister. That pain sits just below the surface the entire time, finally erupting in the film's final moments. Mortimer finds himself disarmed, staring into Indio's gun. Then comes the pocket watch, a small, haunting detail stolen from his sister. As the music plays, it pulls everything back to the surface. The loss, the anger, the years of carrying it. You can see it all in his face. No words are needed. For decades, Lee Van Cleef carried one of the most unforgettable faces in cinema. Sharp cheekbones, narrow eyes, a cold stare. He could walk into a scene and shift the entire atmosphere without a word. He looked like danger before the audience even knew his character's name. But behind that legendary screen presence was a man who understood Hollywood with surprising clarity. Late in life, Van Cleef spoke openly about the actor most tied to his legacy, Clint Eastwood. Many expected bitterness or rivalry, but what they got was calm, thoughtful honesty. To Van Cleef, the public had always misunderstood their relationship. People liked the idea of turning them into competitors, two gunslingers battling for the spotlight. But from his perspective, it was much simpler. They were just two actors whose careers crossed paths at exactly the right time, each bringing something completely different to the screen. Van Cleef admitted that when Eastwood arrived in Italy to make those westerns, he already had momentum. He was younger, fresh-faced, and carried a natural confidence that cameras seemed to love instantly. But what impressed Van Cleef most was Eastwood's restraint. He noticed how Clint understood the power of stillness. While many actors tried to dominate scenes with movement or dialogue, Eastwood did the opposite. He slowed everything down, stayed calm, patient, almost motionless, and that made people watch him even more closely. Van Cleef believed that kind of screen presence could not be taught. Either an actor had it or they did not. When the two first worked together on For a Few Dollars More, Van Cleef said it became obvious almost immediately that Eastwood was becoming something bigger than just another movie star. There was an energy around him that people could feel. The crew noticed it. The audience noticed it. Clint was not simply playing a cowboy anymore. He was building an icon in real time. Still, Van Cleef never viewed that rise as luck. He understood how carefully Eastwood crafted his image. Every quiet pause, every calm stare, every moment of silence was deliberate. Clint protected that image fiercely because those traits were not merely performance choices. They were the foundation of his entire screen persona. At the same time, Van Cleef knew his own road looked very different. While Eastwood fit naturally into the image of the modern American hero, Van Cleef represented something else entirely. He understood that the audience looked at his face and saw danger, suspicion, a man who might betray you the second you turned your back. And he accepted that completely. Instead of fighting it, he learned to turn it into his greatest strength. He did not need audiences to trust him. He just needed them to remember him. That became the key to his entire career. For Van Cleef, his unexpected rise in Italian cinema proved there was not only one path to stardom. He did not need to be the clean-cut hero riding off into the sunset. His place was somewhere murkier, living in the shadows between good and evil. And that is where he thrived. He also rejected the idea that Eastwood had overshadowed him. If anything, Van Cleef believed their differences made both performances stronger. In his eyes, the tension between Eastwood's cool, controlled hero and his own morally gray gunslingers gave those Leone films their magic. Without contrast, those stories would not have worked the same way. Off-screen, he had enormous respect for Eastwood's professionalism. According to Van Cleef, Clint always came prepared, respected the craft, and treated the work seriously. For Lee, that mattered more than ego or celebrity status ever could. But what really stands out is the way Van Cleef viewed legacy itself. He understood that Eastwood eventually became larger than life, not just as an actor, but as a director and filmmaker. Meanwhile, his own legacy settled into something quieter, more mysterious, and he was perfectly at peace with that. He believed people remembered him differently, not for speeches or grand heroic moments, but for smaller things: the eyes, the walk, the silence, the feeling he created when he entered a frame. To him, that kind of memory mattered just as much. Van Cleef also had a deeply realistic view of Hollywood. He understood how quickly the industry could build someone up and then move on to the next big thing. Fame was loud when an actor was young and new, but eventually all that noise faded away. And when it did, only the truth of the work remained. That was the part he cared about most. In the end, His reflections on Clint Eastwood never turned into a dramatic rivalry. There was no resentment hiding underneath, no bitterness about who became the bigger star. Instead, there was understanding. Van Cleef believed Clint became exactly the kind of legend he was meant to become. And, in his own way, Lee Van Cleef became exactly what he was meant to be, too. They were never supposed to be the same man. One represented the calm hero standing in the light. The other carried the danger lurking in the shadows. Together, framed against dust, silence, and blazing sunlight, they created one of the most unforgettable partnerships the Western genre had ever seen. And in the end, it was left to the audience to decide which legend stayed with them.